So next, we're going to do a brief review of controls and how they integrate into an organization, what they are, and just essentially how you would use controls. So let's dive right in, since for many of you from the previous courses, you'll have already been through this material once. We're not going to spend a lot of time on it. Controls describe the measures we take to minimize information assurance risk, falling into generally three categories. Detective controls, which inform us about current or historical incidents. So if you think about what a log entry might tell you, you look at a firewall log and you say, oh, look at that, somebody did something, somebody did a port scan from somewhere outside against us, and that's a detective control. We know that that thing happened, and we can do whatever we'd like to about it after the fact. Corrective controls, which typically mitigate the impact of an incident. So if it could be that we have an intrusion detection system which says, hey, look at that, we just saw traffic which indicates that one of our inside machines is compromised by a bot. And that intrusion detection system now takes action to isolate that system, to turn off its port on the switch that it's connected to. Something that will actually, after the fact again, mitigate the impact that that thing might have had on us. Preventative controls are what people tend to focus on quite a lot. They're important, but they're not the only thing. And they try to stop an event or an incident from happening in the first place. So the fact that we put commercial firewalls between ourselves and networks that we don't trust, that would be a preventative control. So one of the ways that we choose controls is through categorization. You might imagine that not all resources, not all assets are created equal. In order to understand what kind of control would be appropriate, we have to categorize the resource itself. We have to think about what it is that we're trying to protect. And this is actually where a lot of people in this field go awry, and that is inappropriately high levels of control for systems that just don't warrant it, that aren't as important, that shouldn't be protected to that level. So since they help manage risk by reducing potential impact, one of the methods we might use to understand what control to pick would be take a look at the impact. I believe in Barbara's course you would have been exposed to FIPS Pub 199, which is a description of how to assess the impact of compromise of confidentiality, integrity, or availability for a system that you would encounter. It's very simple, it's short reading. If you've not read it yet, I suggest you go get it and take a look. And it's also free. For example, would we use 5-character passwords for nuclear launch codes? No, we would not. The impact of an accidental or a malicious nuclear launch, that seems like an odd contradiction in terms, or is there a non-malicious nuclear launch? But the impact of doing that when we didn't expect to do it is extraordinarily high. So we would be very careful with that. Our controls surrounding access would be stringent and are stringent. A 20-character password for a mall bathroom. Nobody's going to be able to memorize that. It's going to get written down and handed out on placards. And the impact is extremely low. Somebody ends up having to do a little more cleanup for that day than they might have had to. So we're careful to choose, on an ordinary basis, we're careful to choose controls based on the relative impact of compromise. And that's important going forward. If you choose too low, we get the accidental nuclear launch. If you choose too high, everybody leaves the mall because they can't get into the bathroom. So let's talk a little bit about where controls might come from. You could write your own. On a small scale, that works. On a larger scale, writing your own controls, if you've got a lot of them, it's a daunting task, and it's hard to make sure you actually have adequate coverage. Most times it's far better to choose from a list of existing controls that we know work, and then maybe edit or selectively employ from those lists. There are many, many, many lists available to you. There is ISO IEC 27002. That list actually, unfortunately, costs money to possess. It's not a lot of money, but it's more than most students would like to use to complete an assignment, which is where NIST 800-53 comes in. It has the advantage of both being free, being a very complete list, and being extraordinarily well written. It's good work, actually, by the National Institutes of Standard and Technology. So I would suggest getting a copy of that and reading it through. It's extremely long, but what you're looking for is somewhere inside. I like free, so while I have my own copy of 27002 that I have to have for various clients, in this class I will typically refer to the NIST document as the standard. There are many standards. That's just one that we can use, and each of you can get a copy of. So a selection example. I would like to mitigate the potential of a rogue IT person giving themselves or their friends access to sensitive systems. This is actually a common issue. It happens a lot in banking, for example, as an insider is tempted by the amounts of money available, and they go about giving themselves or their friends access to banking systems that they shouldn't have. So this is a fairly common risk that you might want to mitigate. So access to millions of dollars, the potential impact is high, and actually if you read through analysis by the Federal Bureau of Investigation and others, insider risk is common, in many ways more common than most other forms of risk. So, looking at NIST 800-53, there's a control in there under access control. It's called AC5, which talks about separation of duties. The common way of dealing with insider risk is that no one person is made able to authorize themselves or directly authorize a third party without some level of oversight. So we separate the duty of granting access control into two camps that are not directly related to or have a reporting relationship to each other, so that we have that access and control. When we look at AC5, for this banking example, I think high impact is indicated. So we use parts A, B, and C of that control. Go read them. They're not, again, not a long read for that control. There aren't any enhancements in NIST 800-53 for things that you've identified as low, moderate, or high risk. There are often enhancements suggested for each of those levels. In this case, there are no additional ones for high. So we have identified a risk. We have analyzed that risk in terms of its likelihood and impact, and we have selected a control. And now in your organization, you may look at AC5 and say, well, that language doesn't quite work for us. That's fine. You are not, for most of you, you're not the federal government who has to adopt NIST 800-53 in its entirety as it's written. You can use it as a list that you can edit, change, and make work for your environment. With that, I think we've concluded our review, and we can move on now next into presentation of the case and your assignment for next time.